Bwana CS, karibu. Many familiar faces in the room. I see my own boss, the president of the Eastern Africa Editor Society, seated slightly behind you. Daniel Kalinaki, who is also the president of the Uganda Editors Guild. I'm trying to look for fresh faces, those who had good sleep. There's some faces that are still missing. Yeah. I see my friend there, Bwana Swahili, the bureau chief of the China Media Group. Karibu sana. Na ujisikie nyumbani. Yeah. Nasikia amebatizwa anaitwa Wekesa. Yeah. We have friends from Tanzania. Tanzania is just next door, so I hope they didn't take a boat home. And that the reason they're not in the hall yet is because of happiness. I was asked to come and moderate a session on AI, but AI from the lens of asking questions on what the future might look like. If we think of the media from a professional perspective, from a regulatory perspective, but perhaps also from an audience perspective. Then last night, I was told that Waziri is going to speak in my session. And I said, the KEG Council, I think, wants to throw me under the bus, because then we must make certain adjustments to make sure that this session is relevant to the issues that Waziri typically deals with. So using the powers of elders, because nowadays I can claim to be one, I've added a tinge of flavor into this session so that we become a lot more grounded than in the air. And by grounded means that we raise some of the motherhood questions that then provide a firm base upon which we can put AI. Because AI on an empty shell is ukoloni mamboleo. Is that what they say? We'll be donating our spaces, our audiences, and our channels to somebody else who is better organized, who has a clear agenda, what it is they're doing with their media. We can easily open our channels and just consume American movies from A to Z, or Chinese movies for that matter, from A to Z. That's okay, but I don't think that's very good, because over time that then tends to erode our own culture. So there are home motherhood questions that we must ask ourselves. And even as we do that, if Waziri was not here, I was going to push us to have internal reflection on our performance as a media in service of the people of Kenya. And the way I was going to do this was to pick a recent event that we covered and invite us to reflect on how that coverage was. And that recent event was the general election that we covered last year, and I happen to have laid my hands on a recent study that has looked at how that coverage went down. Many issues were raised out of that study that belong in the newsroom, but more so belong to the editorial leadership, who are the people in the room today. This study was done in August. If you just move to the second slide, it was done in August. It picked 4 counties, Uasin Gishu, Nakuru, Kisumu, and Nairobi. And it spoke to a variety of people who are close to the elections, from politicians to election observers, to media, professionals, journalists, civil society, and such like kinds of people. 4 main issues come out. The first one, if you go to the next slide, was an overall assessment on media performance of that election. And the chart that we're looking at suggests that a good number of people were either highly satisfied or moderately satisfied. But slightly over a quarter of the audience is basically not happy with our performance of that election. So even as we want to shoot into AI, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we're shooting with into that domain? If you move to the next slide, the second finding from that study was more a question of our perceived integrity as a fraternity. And this study tested 11 factors. And if you look at the last column, there's a rating there in terms of mean out of a best of 4. But the more important thing for me here is these factors have been ranked in terms of what people think our integrity performance is like. But out of the 11, the last one, the one that we performed the least, in my humble opinion, is the one that is really critical to us delivering to the public in terms of public interest. The question of accuracy in reporting and also impartiality in the delivery of our news. Yeah. I think a food for thought for us. So even as we want to go to AI, what this study is suggesting is that if we shoot into that space with the current reality, then this is what we are taking into AI. So AI is not just the frameworks and the models, but it's also the content that we then push there. If we move to the next slide, finding number 3, this is our own journalists rating how they feel in terms of the latitude or the autonomy to take a view, to take a position on the election. And the picture painted is a very worrying one, because these are people we lead in our newsrooms. And they seem to be suggesting that the view they take of the election is a view that is imposed on them. And knowing how the power dynamics in media work, it's a suggestion that either we are the ones imposing these views on them, or we are conduits allowing other people to impose those views on them. So if we take Sean's lessons of the last 2 days and bring it to this reality, it basically means that we'll continue to be reinforcing interference in the newsroom. And that's a question for us to think about, even as we want to shoot onto those tools. A very worrying one, number 4. In a way, the elephant in the room. I was hoping we'll have a representative from the Media Owners Association here. But this slide, this finding says that the newsrooms have ceded control to media owners. That nearly half of the participants in this study think that to a very large extent, how we cover the election depends on what our owners want us to do. A very delicate question, if you ask me, but one that if we don't confront as editorial leaders, then it doesn't matter what else we do. The media just will continue going down. Because the perception out there is that we are basically conduits of views imposed on us by our owners. As senior leaders in media, knowing that truth as a concept is usually contested, and more so in today's world, and that our true place in that truth contestation won't be a place that we are given, it's a place that we must take. The ideas as to how then to behave and make sure that editorial control is in the hands of journalists, of editors, are ideas that need to come from this room. Because if they don't come from this room, they won't come from anywhere else. The last slide sort of broke that down and asked, if that was a general view, that owners are the ones determining what the media says, what is the view of the journalists themselves? Slightly different, but not very far away from that previous slide. Yeah, even the journalists that this slide spoke to either strongly agreed or agreed with that reality that the owners had an unusually higher control. A quarter of them chose to take the fifth, if you know that Americanism, that they'd rather not be quoted talking about that issue. I raised those questions, and that's the end of those slides. I wanted to raise those questions so that we can, as we have Waziri here, as we have senior colleagues here, we can ask ourselves, how did we end up there? And now that AI is getting into the newsroom, how do we move forward? Questions around accuracy in our reportage, questions around autonomy of the professional in the media to be the one determining and making decisions on how we deal with critical issues going forward. And more importantly, questions around ownership. Yeah? Other studies have even suggested that there is high concentration of media ownership in very, very few hands, and that then brings dynamics that are not helpful for the sustainability of our media. Because ideally, media is supposed to be diverse, should be a marketplace of ideas. We should be able to find, voices should be able to find surface where it matters. So as we move into this area, 5 questions that have been raised there, even with the AI coming into that play. I'd wish to invite the Secretary General of KUJ to come and respond to some of these issues before we come back and invite the CS, and then we'll open it up for a conversation amongst ourselves. Thank you.